Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We will move on again, I think. I'm going to keep one phone line free for someone from a British resident from one of the other 27 EU countries who can explain to all the people in a similar situation who are insulted or worried or offended by the announcement yesterday of the hoops regulations, the rules that they'll have to obey, the list they'll have to be on, the application process they'll have to undertake, why they shouldn't be, why it's absolutely fine and not a cause for concern at all. And that I'll interrupt whatever conversation we're having to take that call. I'll mention it a few more times as well in the course of the programme. And I just want you to list your reasons. I'm not even going to argue with you or quiz you. If you say something that's factually untrue, I'll correct you. But I'm not here to win arguments on this. I'm here to offer reassurance. And if you can offer reassurance to all of the people that we've just spoken to, all of the people that we've spoken to with increasing urgency over the course of the last 12 months, then I will bite your proverbial arm off. Do we need to get someone to explain to us more about this Google record fine that's been brought in by the European Commission, billions of pounds worth, that Google are being... Google have said, we respectfully disagree with EU conclusions. That could be quite an interesting story, that. We shall find out in the course of this hour. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. And I'd like to talk about the Sikh couple and the adoption story. Now, if you're kind enough to listen to this programme on a regular basis, you'll know that it's hard to think of a story that plays more firmly into both my personal and political passions. I am adopted. I'm a huge advocate for adoption. I have 3 godchildren who were adopted. I have been honoured to attend a couple of events with the Coram Foundation down at the Foundlings Hospital in Russell Square, and I recognise in a way that I didn't when I started doing this job just how different the whole process has become, how much the meaning of that very word adoption has changed in the course of my lifetime. I was 28 days old when I was adopted by the best mum and dad that anybody could ever dream of having. And I've always, because of the way mum especially raised me, I was always raised to feel nothing but gratitude to my biological mother as well, who was a teenage girl in the Republic of Ireland who, because of religious fundamentalism and bigotry, would not have been able to... well, either have her pregnancy terminated, which has always been a slightly troubling thing to process, or indeed have a baby out of wedlock without being utterly ostracised and possibly worse by 1970s Irish society. So that's my in on it, but my in has changed hugely since I started doing a tiny bit of work with Coram, because now I understand that adoption is a vastly different process. First of all, there are hardly any 28-day-old babies looking for homes, looking for families. It is much more likely to be somebody who the authorities have already tried to keep with the birth family, or to find a birth relative who could step into the breach and look after them. I'm not so sure about that personally, but you know, just because I think my adoption is an astonishing and undiluted success doesn't necessarily mean that proves the process and the rules in place when I was adopted are the perfect ones, does it? It's daft to think that way. But I do wonder often about... I remember Mum telling me when I was quite young, actually. I think it was when I got into a Catholic public school it's sort of widely regarded as the Catholic equivalent of Eton, and I know it meant an awful lot to my late father to get me in there because of his Catholicism and because of the fact that he'd seen public school boys in his career as a journalist fly past him with less talent and less qualifications, because they can do that thing, you know, they can sort of walk the walk, talk the talk, they know what clothes to wear, they know what cutlery to use when you're eating an artichoke, all that sort of thing. So Dad paid much more money, I've realised since I lost him, than he could possibly have afforded at the time to send me to this school so that I would learn the tricks of the trade. And I have. Win. Everyone's a winner. He bought me a golden ticket. And if I don't find a way to buy the same golden ticket for my children, I've got a horrible feeling he's going to come back and haunt me. But it was also the Catholicism, that side of it, the idea that the Benedictine monks that ran my school before all of the scandals unfolded, that was pretty much the biggest, for a lad from my dad's background in Yorkshire, the schools in Yorkshire, that was the biggest thing you could aspire to for your son as a Catholic Yorkshireman. To send your son to that school was you know, it was an amazing aspiration to have, and the fact that he pulled it off still awes me, I'll be honest with you. Turned up for a retreat at a little place in Harrogate once, and because it was a parish that was attached to the school, and we'd be sent out to do work in the parishes and stay over for a few nights. And one of the priests, one of the monks on the trip, came up to me and said, "There's a lady who wants to talk to you. I think she thinks she might be your cousin." And this ancient lady with a broad Yorkshire accent said, "You're Jim's son, aren't you?" And even she knew that someone from her family had gone to this school. That's kind of what it meant. And I'm mentioning that only, well, for two reasons. I get adoption, but also Mum was told, because Mum's a Protestant, Mum was told at some of the adoption agencies they went to before they found me, Mum was told that she couldn't have a Catholic baby. Can't have a Catholic baby, you won't be able to bring him up right. And when I got into Ampleforth, she wanted to write to them and sort of go, "Ha ha! Stick that in your pipe, stick that in your thurifer and wave it." Bit of a niche gag there. In fact, I'll be surprised if more than a few dozen people get that joke. And that's my background. The reason I've given you that chapter of the autobiography is pretty straightforward. This couple have been told they can't raise a non-Sikh baby. I don't know whether the whiteness of the baby matters particularly, the way it's been reported in the Times today. They've begun legal action, that's why it's made the news, after claiming they were refused permission to adopt a white child because of their cultural heritage. That happened to my parents. Isn't that amazing? It's sort of in a completely different way, no colour involved, pure religion. So Mum was a Protestant, Dad was a Catholic. Wasn't good enough for a couple of the adoption agencies in the early 70s in the United Kingdom. Where, and looking back now, because God, it really is turning into autobiography hour, but when my wife and I thought that we weren't going to be able to have children of our own, and we started looking into, I mean, in the first instance, fertility treatment, in the second instance, adoption and related issues, you realised how much it had changed. And yet this is a story that suggests some things haven't changed at all. I can't really imagine that my life would have been diminished if I'd been adopted by Protestants or by Muslims or by Jews or by Sikhs. But I don't know. I really don't know. And I want to know what you think. That's all. So legal action has started. They were allegedly refused permission to adopt a white child because of their cultural heritage.
A Sikh couple say they were told they couldn't adopt a white child because of their cultural heritage. The couple told an adoption agency they were happy to take a child from any ethnic background, but say they were advised instead to adopt a child from India. It's legal for adoption agencies to give preference to parents from the same ethnic group, but government guidelines say different racial backgrounds should not prevent a couple from adopting. Let's talk to the couple, Reena and Sandeep Manda, who are in their home in Maidenhead. And with us in the studio, their solicitor, Georgina Calvert-Lee. Hello, all of you.
Hello.
Let me talk to you both, first of all, about your experience then, before we bring in your solicitor. How did you react when you were told that?
Oh, we were shocked, upset, angry, all the words that you can think of, yes.
And what did you say?
Yeah, definitely. Very hurt.
What did you say?
Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, there is a delay on the line, so forgive me. What did you say when you were told that?
Well, we were just very shocked, and when we were told that we couldn't adopt because of things like cultural heritage, and that was one of the sole factors, really, we were quite shocked. So we challenged it and just said, look, why don't you come and understand who we are as people, rather than just looking at one factor. For us, we're British born, we're born and bred, we're like any other British couple. And whilst things like cultural heritage we believe is important, we think a number of factors need to be looked at. You know, your cultural heritage, your financial stability, the couple that you are, how young you are, where you live, all sorts of things need to be looked at. And the fact that they looked at this one particular area of cultural heritage and didn't proceed our application because of that was made us feel really angry.
So what do you want to do now, Reena?
Actually, even well, our next steps are actually going through the international adoption route. But for this case itself, we want to raise awareness. We want this not to happen to other couples. We want to make sure that this is changed. Going through the international adoption route is a costly affair, and you know, anyone would struggle to go through that route. But it's really about changing this policy now, so it doesn't affect other couples.
OK, well, let's bring in your solicitor then, Georgina Calvert-Lee. So just remind people what the rules are then, what the guidelines are.
Well, the cultural heritage is clearly an important factor, along with many other things. And the problem in this case is that it has been prioritised as a threshold consideration. So whereas the Manders simply want to register their interest in adopting, as you might want to register to participate in a race, they're not asking to be allowed to win the race, they simply want to register. What they were confronted with was simply a denial of possibility to register. They were not allowed to register and told that that was principally because the adoption agency thought that they couldn't win. Well, that's not how the law is meant to work. What is meant to happen is that the considerations of cultural heritage and the many other factors are considered on a case-by-case basis in relation to the child. But anyone who wants to adopt and is over 18 can register, ought to be able under the law to register to adopt. And then when children come up and become available for adoption, it's at that point that a specific child, factors relating to a specific child are considered and the best match is sought. So we don't think that Adopt Berkshire in this case or any other agency applying these rules are correct in prioritising as a threshold matter the cultural heritage before even registering people to adopt.
Because effectively that is a ban on interracial adoption.
Essentially, it's almost like a form of segregation, which seems very anachronistic.
Right. We have a statement from the Adopt Berkshire agency. Mr. and Mrs. Mander were assessed by them, deemed as suitable parents. We asked for an interview, but a spokesman said we do not comment on ongoing court cases. In terms of your desire to adopt, Mr. and Mrs. Mander, what do you do next?
So we are going down the intercountry adoption route, and we've had a 9-month, I think 9 or 10 months grueling process. Yes. We've had the training for that, and we're so excited about it. We've been approved by the Department of Education for that now. So we're in the process of now appointing our lawyers in the USA to manage our USA affairs. So that's where our focus is right now, and we're 100% committed to that. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Could you not go elsewhere in Great Britain, use another agency, or is it to do with where you live?
Well, we could have gone elsewhere. I think I looked at a different adoption agency at the time. I think maybe in Bernardo's or something. I can't remember exactly which one it was. They weren't taking domestic adoptions at the time. And there's other places we could have gone as well. But to be honest, the very first communication we got from Adopt Berkshire painted a very bleak picture that we wouldn't really have much of a chance anywhere in the UK, which is why we decided to go down the intercountry adoption route. OK. And what do you think, Rena, about what has happened to you in the way you feel that you have been forced to proceed?
I think it's been quite hurtful in the way that it's been pushed forward from a cultural heritage perspective. You know, what makes a good parent, and I think that, you know, the fact that we've gone through the International Adoption Centre and actually been successful and been signed off by the Department of Education to adopt from the USA, that would have been the same process that we would gone through the domestic route. So I think it's quite hurtful that we were, I suppose, written off at the first hurdle. And as Georgina said there, look, we weren't looking to win the race. We were just looking to apply like anybody else. We didn't even get to the application stage. And you know, all we're saying is look at us as a whole. Don't just look at cultural heritage. We're a British couple. You know, cultural heritage can mean a number of things. But look at other things as well, and then say no if we're not suitable, which is fine. You know, we may not be suitable, but look at the holistic picture.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. I really appreciate your time this morning. Rena and Sandeep Mander, thank you. And to their solicitor as well, Georgina Calvert-Lee. Thank you very much.
What do you think of that? And if you've got a story, I'd love to hear it. I really would. I'd love to hear a story about being raised in a family that had a different cultural heritage to your own. And it may be a happy story, it may be an unhappy story. I recognise that both exist, but there are also happy and unhappy stories surrounding adoptions that did reflect ethnicity and cultural heritage. So one bad story does not a disastrous policy make, any more than one good story makes a perfect policy. I'd hope you'll ring me on this one. It's going to be quite a lonely hour if you don't. But it is a simple question of whether or not, if a child is in need of a home, then it shouldn't really matter what colour or faith, unless they subscribe to beliefs that are clearly harmful. Oddly, I did find some support for that when the UKIP couple were told they couldn't foster Polish children. I did think there were problems there that other people couldn't see, because if you subscribe to the school of thought that this kid and his biological mum should never have been in the country at all, I think you should be given an opportunity to prove that that won't dilute your ability to care for the child. You believe that he shouldn't be in this country, but you want him in your house. Just need that explaining to me. But in terms of this story, if you've got mum and dad and they're ready and they want a child and they can't have one because all the kids are white, I don't know I don't know quite how to process that. What do you think of it? And by all means, pop my idealistic balloon and tell me that it does really matter, because I've got silly anecdotes. I've got friends who are in mixed race couples, and if the guy's black and mum's white, the thing that she needs the most help with is dealing with hair, with Afro-Caribbean hair. So she has to go to her mother-in-law to get advice on how to deal with her daughter's hair, because it's so out of her own sphere of experience. But we laugh about that. That's a triviality. That's a surface level cultural heritage difference. There must be more serious ones. There must be more problematic ones. I remember not that long ago, there was an actor who changed his name, didn't he, back to his sort of African name, having been adopted by a white family. And I don't think that caused any problems with the white family, but it speaks of what's the word I'm looking for? A slightly more nuanced reality than perhaps the one I'm reflecting now. So, first of all, were you adopted into, or did you adopt into your family a child from a vastly different background, a child who was a different colour? Or did you bring a child into I mean, they're not a particularly devout Sikh family, so I think this has got more to do with skin colour than with religion, but did you raise a child that was a different colour from you? There'll be stepmoms and stepdads listening who recognise that there are obstacles you have to negotiate, but they shouldn't be used to stop potentially loving mum and dad from loving a baby, loving a child who happens to be white. Or am I just being a complete naive fool? And some of the responses to the conversation we had in the last hour suggest that there are people out there who would find it absolutely impossible to feel anything but hatred and disgust for someone of a different ethnicity to their own. 12:15 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Sikh couple told they were wrong culture to adopt a white child. As ever on the programme, we are not tired of experts, even if other corners of the country are. So if you work in the field, can you either correct or confirm my suspicion that on this occasion cultural heritage is just shorthand for skin colour? If the baby is white and the potential adoptees are brown, the policy seems to be it's not going to happen. I'd need that confirming or indeed contradicting. But we'll talk about the principle of it and the background to the story that's led you to your conclusion. My conclusion is that it shouldn't make any difference at all. You just go pass the same tests, have the same panel, and if you end up with a white baby and you're brown-skinned, if you were racist, you wouldn't want one, would you? So what's the problem? Louise is in Glasgow. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Yeah, I've been listening since about 8 this morning, and it wasn't until you said something a moment ago about how it means a lot to you personally, James, and I really relate to that. I am also adopted. I also would highly consider in the future adopting, as much as I think I can have my own child for all I know.
Sure.
I totally agree. It shouldn't make a difference. For heaven's sake, it's 2017. We should be embracing culture and it enriches our lives.
Well, you could, just to be that sort of party pooper, you could do that the other way around. If it was 2015, I wouldn't even have paused at what you just said, but it's 2017. We seem to be rejecting diversity and culture on a scale that we haven't seen since the 50s.
I know, and it's bonkers. And there was a lady I listened to this morning saying that white babies should only go to white families and black babies should only go to black families. And as much as I can understand, when I look at her argument, I can understand that. I wholly disagree with it. But
you weren't adopted into a different coloured family from your own skin colour, were you?
No, I wasn't. But I'm wondering if I'm a hypocrite anyway, because my biological mother did actually ask that I was adopted into a Christian family. So I'm sitting and saying all this, and then I'll look and think, wait a minute.
Yeah, it doesn't make you a hypocrite, but it makes you a product of the principle that you're objecting to.
Yeah, precisely. And don't get me wrong, I don't know how much that was actually checked into. My parents certainly aren't, and never have been.
Do you think they faked it? Came in with their rosary beads. And
I mean, they would probably
had Cliff Richard blaring out of the car as they pulled into the car park of the adoption agency.
Oh, I hope not. But I mean, they would probably tick the box. But whether they are, for all intents and purposes, practicing Christians, no.
I'm not sure we're allowed to be the. I mean, I'm grateful for the contribution, and it's at least as valid as mine. But I guess it would be 10 times more valuable, both of our views, if we'd been raised by black parents or brown parents and said it doesn't mean, because there must be problems and difficulties, but are they so big that it should never be allowed to happen? That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Yeah, well, earlier I was wondering if actually, could we be part of, and maybe this is looking at it with a rose-tinted view, but could this time in the world be part of the change to sort of remove the taboo of adoption and be the sort of racial challenges that we have that coincide with multi-racial adoptive?
Well, this is unfortunately, that's an even bigger cat to put among the pigeons, because I mean, we are looking at a world, especially in America, but it's reflected as many of America's worst excesses are at the moment here. People who talk with a straight face about white genocide and the idea that if I'd fallen in love with a black woman and we'd had a baby, that would be part of a deliberate and cynical political attempt to wipe out white people. People believe this, Louise. I know that you think I'm joking, but there's a lot of them out there.
No, I know. Unfortunately, I sadly don't. That's the real sadness of it. But it's whether or not it would, are our views slightly tainted because we've had such positive adoptive experiences. Yeah. And I think that probably is accurate, actually.
Yeah, and Dirk picks up that point. Louise, thank you so much. It picks up that point that perhaps we needed a different perspective. He says, as an adoptive dad myself, I know that an adopted child has a great deal to contend with already with regard to his or her identity. Social services are only trying to minimise these issues as the child grows up. There are white families queuing around the block to adopt white children, so why would you match them with an Indian couple given the choice? If this sounds harsh, just bear in mind that all of this is done for the optimal outcome of the child, not the potential adopters. And, you know, as an adoptive dad, we have to, Louise and I have to respect that, possibly more than we respect our own position, because our own position is built upon a very, very different worldview. And the other thing that people of my age who were adopted have to bear in mind when addressing this is that it's not the same. You're almost always talking about an older child who has had quite a troubled past, quite a troubled early years. There'll be separation issues. There'll be possibly forms of PTSD. There may have been abuse or neglect. And so you're dealing with all sorts of issues already now as an adoptive parent, issues that weren't even on the park as far as my adoption and my parents were concerned. So you could see if there is no shortage of white parents, maybe there is an argument here, actually. And Dirk, I don't think anyone's going to put it better than you just did. Martin is in Rochester. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi there. I was just going to give you a slightly different perspective on it, really. Yeah. So I'm a white male that was adopted into a white family in the early 80s. I think, like you mentioned, were incredibly proud at the time to be adopted. And it was no secret, and people at school knew that. And I suffered the most horrendous bullying.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And, you know, suffering at school as a result of that kind of information that I shared with pride.
Oh, man.
And so what that leads to... I
wish you'd been at my school.
Obviously... Well, this was in North Wales. It wasn't quite as metropolitan.
Well,
but
okay.
The point that I was going to make is that I suffered, and my brother to that extent suffered as well, to bullies. And that was a white child going into a white family. And so it just raises the question that if I'd have had two black parents or two Indian parents, and I just wonder, well, if it was, you know, it was something that I was bullied that I had...
It's a very good point. It's a very good point.
But if it was so physically obvious that I had been adopted or they weren't my biological parents, I just wonder how much worse the verbal bullying or the physical bullying would have been. And so, you know, it is different times, and I appreciate that. But you know, I think those different times are a little bit aspirational. I think if we're honest,
that's
I'm not
beautifully
sure
put. That's really well put. Aspirational, and you can't play with a child's life because of your aspirations. Because there's two responses to what you've just said. There's the one that says, "Oh yes, but I think you'll find, Martin, that you're sort of suggesting that we should create our society according to what won't annoy bullies," which is true. You are. But it's the kid getting bullied that should be paramount in our thoughts, and you're probably right to say that you might, or you probably would be, adding to his burden.
And as somebody who was on the end of that and who wasn't, you know, having to deal with physical differences, you know, it can tell you it was no fun. So if
I can. I mean, it popped up a couple of times. It popped up a couple of times for me, but it wasn't. It was never sort of a lasting source of bullying or teasing or negativity. I don't know why. I was just luckier than you, I guess, wasn't I? That's all.
That's right, and it's
could easily have gone the other way. Martin, we're going to do that thing where we both pause and then start talking, and then the other person starts talking as well. But I thought that was a brilliant point. Whether it's enough to take this Sikh couple's case onto the scrap heap, we'll find out in the course of the next half an hour. I have to tell you, this will probably come up in the news, but I want to tell you before that, the total number of cladded buildings, the total number of cladding samples submitted for fire safety tests has now reached 95. That comes from 32 local authorities, which will, of course, be of all political hues. There's a great confusion out there when people say, don't politicise this, don't politicise this. It is politics. Social housing is politics. You cannot take the politics out of public expenditure issues. It's akin to trying to take the eggs out of a baked cake. But it's not party politics. It's about national policies with regard to austerity that all councils have been duty-bound to follow. So it's not party politics. Guess what? Every single one of them has failed fire safety tests. 100% of samples submitted for tests from 95 buildings in 32 local authorities failed. Potential Grenfell Towers. Thank God they've identified the problem and are seeking to remedy it. The only people who won't be surprised by this unfolding statistic, people who've been listening to this programme since the tragedy happened, because yesterday in particular, talking to people who work in the sector, trying to work out how this could have happened, given that so many people would have been involved in the various processes, stages of the process. It doesn't shock us at all. I'll be surprised if they find any cladding that passes the test, frankly. But one of yesterday's callers, the one who actually works very specifically in this field, but in Scotland, and was trying to help us understand why in Scotland there aren't any buildings clad like this. He's been back in touch with me. He thinks he's solved it. And I think he's right. And I go a little further than he does in his email today and suggest that this is yet more evidence for the coming public inquiry, because there's a reason why it didn't happen in Scotland, and that reason looks very similar to what happened in Camberwell at Lacanau House just under a decade ago. It's 12:30. Where I enjoy these conversations the most, the ones where I feel my opinion shifting with every call. Started off thinking that it was, just wrong for a Sikh couple. I think more relevantly a brown couple, a brown-skinned couple, to be told that they can't adopt a white-skinned child. But then Martin's call just sort of stopped me in my tracks a bit and says, you're adding to that baby's burdens, that little child's burdens, in a sense, by giving potential bullies even more difference to focus upon, because bullies always focus upon difference, whether it's spectacles or body weight or ginger hair, whatever it is that makes somebody stand out from a crowd. In Martin's case, simply being adopted was enough difference to give the bullies purchase, but to be adopted and to have different coloured parents perhaps would exacerbate the problem. But then Chris in Manchester weighs straight back in again with this email. The bullying argument, or text, I beg your pardon, could also be used for why same-sex couples shouldn't be allowed to adopt children either, James. Or even have children of their own, I suppose. It's a good argument, but surely we should tackle the problem of bullies and teach progressive values in our schools. Don't ask me how to do that, though. And again, I agree with you, but do you use a child who's already had a very unfortunate start in life to win your battles against bigotry by putting them in a scenario where they might suffer? Karen is in Hither Green. Karen, what do you think?
Oh, hi, James.
Hi,
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I'm calling from a confused perspective, so I don't think I'll be able to
come to the right place.
Train of thought, I'm afraid. Let me just share my situation in brief. So I'm from the north originally, from a small village in Lancashire, and I was adopted from birth, and I'm a mixed race, but the problem is my mixed race is completely unknown. So I knew I had a white English mother, but there was non-disclosure of who my father was.
Gosh.
My natural mother would not disclose to anybody who my father was. So I've spent my entire life having guessed Karen's ethnicity, because I don't look distinctly anything. If I get a tan, I could be Spanish, Greek, Turkish, Asian. I really don't look distinctly anything, which in some ways has benefited me, and in some ways has caused me to live my life feeling a little bit identity crisis, I suppose, because people do seem very obsessed with ethnicity, and sometimes they will ask, where am I from, before they even ask my name.
Yes.
And so...
So would you say you don't look Anglo-Saxon then? I mean, because you mentioned going darker in the sun. You're quite dark to start with when people ask where you're...
I have an olive skin, yeah, and I don't have features that resemble anything particular.
I just want to see you now. This is like there's so much suspense here. It's just ridiculous.
I know. I almost rebel against it because, like I say, I'm from the north originally, but I now live in the diversity of London,
yes.
and it's since I moved to London 17 years ago that I've felt that obsession of what is my race from other people. More so, it's intensified, and I kind of like that I don't know, because I've grown up feeling ethnicity doesn't matter.
What about with your mum and dad? What about your? I mean, did you ever feel conscious of it with regard to? Because I remember one story from the 70s that just came back to me of a white couple who'd adopted a black baby and then found him in the bath trying to scrub his skin clean because he wanted to be white like mummy and daddy. It wasn't a racism issue. He wasn't suffering. He just wanted to be the same colour as mummy and daddy, and I can kind of understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not black. I'm olive skinned.
No, I know, but your parents, if your parents are from Lancashire, they've got skin like unbaked dough, I presume.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Speaking as a child of Yorkshire people.
Yeah, I mean, I was the ethnic person in my village. I didn't identify with anybody, and it didn't help not knowing, I suppose, what definitively my mixed race was. But yeah.
So give me your shot on this then. You can't go away without giving me an opinion. I'm not going to hold you to it necessarily for the rest of your natural, but should a brown-skinned couple be allowed to adopt a white-skinned child if there are plenty of white-skinned potential adoptees in the system as well?
Oh, 100%. My life has benefited from being adopted from whatever circumstance, because apparently I was given up because I came out with a mixed-race skin tone. Whether that's true or not, but that's been what I've been told.
Yes.
The grandparents, my natural grandparents, apparently had a problem with that, and then it's not really surprising why my mother refused to say who the dad was from thereafter, because she was dominated by her parents' view in that way. But
yes, there was a lot of that around.
Anyway, I've lived a great life, and I'm extremely thankful to my adoptive family, but I do wish people weren't as obsessed with ethnicity, because it just breeds contempt of other people when it's
it does, and
is the obsession.
I wonder if we've fallen into that trap a little bit here as well, because you're sort of talking as if being adopted by a white family would be demonstrably superior to being adopted by a brown family, simply because of ethnicity and well, they say cultural heritage, but there are plenty of. I mean, every family's got its problems. Every community's got its ne'er-do-wells. Every town's got its rogues. It's not determined by colour, or religion, or ethnicity. Look, I tell you, because I know that the popular thing for the far right now is to keep using the scandal, the appalling scandal. Finally, of course, brought to an end, or at least some of the culprits were brought to justice by a Muslim Crown prosecution solicitor in the north. But the idea that somehow the appalling abuse visited upon teenage girls in the north of England is evidence of some sort of, I don't know, white genocide conspiracy. All of these people who are usually all over my social media saying, in response to a tweet about football, yeah, but what about Rotherham? Yeah, you lefty. There's nothing on the Church of England story. The actual Archbishop of Canterbury failed to pass on allegations of abuse by a paedophile priest The actual Archbishop of Canterbury. Same in my own faith, Catholicism. There's been a paedophile cover-up that goes all the way to the top flight of the Vatican, and yet all of these people never mention that. I find that genuinely odd. I'm equally disgusted by all of it. I don't care what colour a child abuser is or what faith they claim to belong to. Probably more disgusted by the Catholic cover-up because it was my schoolmates that got abused. But anyway, that's by the by. Just explaining what is meant when somebody like that says that they don't care about ethnicity. Maria is in Reading. Maria, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, I'm an adoptive mom of 2 kids. I'm a Spanish. My partner is Spanish as well.
Yes.
And we recently adopted 2 British kids.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's this fact is known by everybody surrounding us. It's known in school, and it's something that we are very open about.
How are they getting on?
They're doing great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, everybody likes them.
Fantastic. And how old were they? How old were they when you got them?
They were 4 and 5 at the time.
Cool. That's a lovely thing to ring in and hear. I'm so happy for you. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. Tell me why you rang in.
No, it's fun because in my experience, this it all goes down to the person or the people who are handling your applications.
Yes.
In an adoptive parent, and they're humans. And they have their own views of life and what's right and what's wrong. And it depends on who is dealing with your application at some point when the decision is being made. And it happened to us that, for instance, at the beginning of the adoption process, our adoption application was lost for a few months.
Yes.
Because it was too tricky to handle. You know, we were Spaniards. Well, the Spaniards doing with the kids? Are they taking them abroad? And, we came here to get some kids and export them, if you will. And it took a while for us to find the right person in the charity that is been handling our case.
Yes.
That took care of that application and managed to get us a couple of kids for us to adopt.
And do you feel any? I mean, you're going to raise them as the children of Spanish parents, right?
In both nationalities, because they can't have dual citizenship, and also they're learning Spanish, and I think it's an advantage to them.
And of course it is. I mean, even in this curious country that we're trying to create at the moment, being multilingual, mobile, intelligent and highly educated is still going to be quite a good thing for a child, however much effort they're trying to put into persuading us of the opposite. But were you ever... I mean, what about the colour? Because this is cultural heritage, isn't it? Spanish versus English. The colour issue, did that come up during the process at all?
Well, we were advised that even if we were interested, because it's a funny job, the one of the family finder, as it's called.
Yes.
So there's somebody in the adoption organizations that is looking for profiles that match your preferences. And they send you profiles like every day. You could get, if you're lucky, you could get a few, or some weeks you will get none, depending. So we're getting a mixed race or white or Polish or whatever you can think of. But we were advised by some of the family finders that even if we were interested in some black kids, we would never be able to adopt them because the guidelines at the time were that they have to protect their heritage.
Yes, and you wouldn't be able to do that because you wouldn't have the things to draw on. And yeah, I suppose it depends on so many variables, because Julian Suffolk has described how children in care describe never having heard the words, "I really love you." And it shouldn't matter. I mean, if there's nobody else for a black child, there's nobody else but these white parents here, it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that they still shouldn't be allowed to adopt. But equally, because it's about love, isn't it? Not colour. It's about finding a loving home. That's what you have to prove, that you're going to provide a secure and loving home, not a white one or a brown one or a black one, or a Spanish one or an English one or a I don't know, a German one.
Yeah, I just think it doesn't have to do with color. Kids are blind to color at this age, and they don't understand color. They just think they're like you, and they like you because you're their parent. But at the same time, it's very clear to everyone that they don't look like us. They're different. Yes. We're dark-haired, dark eyes, they're blonde. They are typical English, and if they're different, so be it.
Yeah, well, there you go. If they are different, so be it. If you were in charge, the country would be feeling like a very different place at the moment, Maria. I hope your happiness, I hope your success story continues. I really do, and I'm sure it will. 12:45 is the time. After the travel news, I'll bring you that story from Scotland, and I think, and it's a sort of cautious entry level, I think this explains why there are no issues with cladding in Scotland and why this problem in England is becoming more political by the minute. To find out a little bit more about this £2.1 billion fine issued to Google by the European Commission, and then do not let me go home without sharing with you this story from Scotland that my caller yesterday, and now I think is profoundly relevant to one of the questions we tried to tackle yesterday, which is after finding out that 100%, and the number is climbing, but the percentage remains 100% of the cladding tested since Grenfell has been found to fail fire safety tests. Why isn't there any in Scotland? I think this is potentially very important. It's just news, published news, but I was unaware of it, so I suspect you probably are too. Before that, though, Steve Kuncevich is a business advisory lawyer at Slater & Gordon and joins me on the line now. I'd like to say pretend I'm completely ignorant of all these matters, Steve, but between you and me, you don't have to pretend. Explain to somebody completely ignorant of all of these matters what Google have done wrong and why they've been hit with such an enormous fine.
Well, I'll do my best, James. So, the issue here is that Google is seen as pretty much the only game in town as far as search engines go. And what the EU's done is fine them for breach of competition law. And what they've said is that when people search for listings on shopping sites, in this particular case, they might expect to receive quite a wide range of information. But what Google have done is manipulated the results so that their results, where you buy directly from them through their shopping platform, appear over the results of other people. What they say is that this distorts free competition, it stops other people getting in the action, and ultimately it's misleading to consumers as well. So that's why they've been forced to step in this case. And why such an enormous fine? Because this is something that's been going on for quite some time. It's meant to send a message to them, and it's one of only 3 or 4 different antitrust, as people call them, yes, or competition law investigations that are going on against Google at the moment. I think it's reflected of the share of the market that they command, which is absolutely massive, given that they are the only game in town, and it's meant to be punitive. Competition law cases, when they go this way, do tend to involve pretty big fines. I didn't, and I may be stepping out of your field of expertise now, I didn't know you could shop on Google. I thought you got sent to sort of Amazon and eBay. You get sent to all sorts of listings at the top of the page, but I think it's more about the fact that it's the listings that they want you to go to, rather than it being a completely open competition where you can pretty much find anybody. So it might be people that advertise with them, or it might be companies in which they have stakes that you're being pushed towards. Yeah, as I understand it, that's the reason the decision's gone this way. What happens when we leave the European Union then? Well, that's a very good question. A lot of people are asking. I'm asking it a lot at the moment, Steve. I'll level with you. I'm not just asking lawyers. I wouldn't worry about it. So I think what's like to happen when we leave the EU is we're going to end up with a lot of laws that are very similar to what they've got, because we're going to want to continue to do business with them. So ultimately, this is a case between the EU and a case involving an American company. Yes. So I'm not too sure that leaving the EU would have any impact on this kind of judgment, given that Google are going to have to reckon with European law going forward anyway. And except that we wouldn't get any of the money. Well, that's exactly right. So they can impose a £2.1 billion fine. It will just go into sort of EU coffers to be used as they see fit. Do Google have a right of appeal on this? They absolutely do, and they've already said that they're going to be looking to appeal this decision. So whilst a lot of people are saying, how is this going to change what they do, given that the appeals are likely to take years, this has taken years, it's going to be a while before we see any major changes in the way Google operates. Wow. Well, that was brilliant, Steve. Well, I'm not sure about that, but thank you very much. No, absolutely was. I now have a full understanding of this. I'll be passing myself as off as an expert by the end of lunch. Steve Kuncevich from Slater & Gordon, a business advisory lawyer. Interesting, that, and another sort of example of things that perhaps we should have known before casting that vote last June. This sort of power that you wield is all about strength in numbers. But this is about power of a very different kind. This is about a fire. In June of 1999, or at least that's where this report comes from. A 55-year-old man died in the fire, and 5 other people, including a 15-month-old child, were injured. It took place, forgive me if you're in Scotland and you know this story inside out,
or if you're not in Scotland and you know this story inside out, destroyed flats on 9 floors of the Garnock Court block in Irvine. Witnesses reported that a vertical ribbon of cladding on one corner of the block was quickly ablaze, and the fire reached the 12th floor within 10 minutes of it starting. Is this sounding familiar to anybody? The flats were owned by North Ayrshire Council, who ordered the removal of plastic cladding and PVC window frames as a precaution, and I quote, at whatever cost, so they could be replaced with safer materials. The then local MP, Brian Donohoe, said at the time that he believed there was something quite wrong in the use of the cladding. This report is from June 1999. And he's quoted as talking to BBC Scotland, "Afterwards I had surgeries that were full of people who wanted to get out of these flats as soon as was possible. That clearly was enough to drive me and drive the council." He's also concerned, or was also concerned, that tower blocks across the UK which use similar cladding could be at risk, and the Labour MP pushed for a parliamentary inquiry into the review by the Select Committee on Environment, Transport and Regional Affairs, which reported back in January of 2000. It said the evidence received during the inquiry suggested that most external cladding being used in the UK did not pose a serious threat to life or property in the event of fire, adding, "Notwithstanding, we do not believe that it should take a serious fire in which many people are killed before all reasonable steps are taken towards minimising the risks." There's more. I'll share it with you tomorrow, and it doesn't necessarily speak of culpability, but it does answer one question that we asked yesterday, and this is why it's worth asking them, however ambitious it may seem at the time. How come there's none of this cladding in Scotland? How come all of these buildings checked are in England, and there's been no reports of any similarly clad buildings in Scotland? There's your answer. Council's calling for it all to be taken down, ordered it all to be taken down, and I quote, at whatever cost. There may be more to that than meets the eye, and I may have got, I don't think I've got any of the facts wrong, but that was speaking yesterday to John, who talked about the work he does in Scotland. There's a picture of the tower block, and it literally has gone up one side like a sort of a vertical line of charred building. I think we might be hearing more about that in the coming days. Do you? That's 12:57. Last word on the question of adoption is going to go to Mark in Woodford. Mark, what would you like to say?
Well, long-time listener to the show, James, followed up on a few different subjects, but in this instance, it relates directly to me. Basically, I was put in care in 1975 with a white foster home.
Yeah.
Other kids, I ended up getting adopted at 6 years old, and I suffered with the bullying and all that. It was all too much, I think.
Were you adopted by white parents?
Yes,
okay.
And it was just a struggle. They didn't, like you earlier, you spoke about the hair being a minor thing. It was a major thing.
Okay.
But I had friends whose black parents would hold me down and try and comb my hair in the playground, and this just went on. And then I grew up through the 80s. I'm a couple of years younger than you, and the police was a bit heavy-handed, let's say, and to try to explain to my parents that I've been stopped by the police. And then they didn't understand. Oh, what have you done wrong? And I'm saying it's because I'm black, and this kept on happening. Then I got beaten up by the police, and it was totally chaotic. Like I just felt that I didn't fit in. Well, I was too white to be black, too black to be white, and I would just appeal to those parents, that are looking to seek to adopt this boy. Please don't be selfish, because we live in a world that's gone back to the 80s, the 70s, and they might not feel it themselves, but that child, will be targeted, and I know how I feel, and I've still got issues, but because of it, do you know what I mean? I still don't relate properly with my own kids. Do you know what I mean? It's been a struggle. I'm married now for 4 years, and I've done quite well in my life, but I'm telling you that it's like it really was a lot. It's stuff that, from what I've gone through in my younger days, like I would never forget it, and I think. It's all been caused by that. Like, the social services didn't care. It's like, you can have all the love you want in a particular household,
Did you get a lot of love?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I would say, James, that if the outside world is very cruel, and so you can be protected and insulated in your house, and maybe
when you step outside, and Martin's experience as a white boy growing up in a similar era with no ethnic issues, the adoption was enough for him to get beaten up as well. I told you the pendulum was going to swing a lot. I'm not going to make any final comment on this one, because I'm not going to contradict what Marcus said. That's his life he's described. Who the hell am I to pick any holes at all in his analysis. Mark, mate, take care. Make sure the next call is on a slightly more cheerful note, yeah?
We will speak soon,
my friend. It's coming up to 1 o'clock.